Welcome to story time. Today we will be reading the last chapter of Little Eddie. It's called Any Old Junk Today. Never a week went by without Eddie bringing home some piece of what Eddie called valuable property and his father called junk. The family always knew when Eddie had brought home a new treasure. Eddie would always announce at dinner, "I had a very enjoyable day today." When Eddie said this, his father would look at his mother and say, "Uh-oh." After dinner, his father would go down to the basement, and there he would find another piece of junk added to Eddie's collection. "Now see here, Edward," said his father one evening, "this junk collecting has reached the limit. What happens every week? I'll tell you. On Friday night, every man in this neighborhood puts his rubbish out for the rubbish collectors, and every Saturday a large part of it lands in our basement. Now, I am tired of it. The basement looks like a junk shop, or worse. It looks like a dump. This thing has got to stop." Eddie looked very downcast as he said, "You were glad when I brought home the telegraph pole, weren't you?" "Well, that was different," said his father. "Moreover, that is past. I'm talking about the present. This junk collecting has reached the limit. We will never get all of this stuff out of the basement." "But Papa," said Eddie, "I don't want it out. It's my valuable property." "Valuable property!" exclaimed his father. "Junk! Nothing you ever bring home is worth the room it takes." "I brought the telegraph pole," murmured Eddie. "Well, yes, the telegraph pole," said his father. The following Saturday, Rudy and the twins went on a hike with some of the boys in Rudy's class in school. Eddie wanted to go too, but they said that he was too little. He felt very badly until his mother said that he could go for a drive in the car with herself and his father. They were going out into the country to see if they could find a shop where they could buy a nice tilt-top table. It was a beautiful day, and as they drove along the roads, Eddie saw the cows and the horses on the farms. He saw men working in the fields. He read the signs along the road. Fresh eggs. Broilers. The first time Eddie saw the word broiler, he said, "What is a broiler?" "It's a young chicken that is small enough to broil," said his mother. Eddie could read most of the billboards. He found it exciting to be able to read, to have letters mean something. They had been driving for about an hour when Mr. Wilson brought the car to a stop in front of a store. There was a large sign hanging outside which Eddie could not read. "What does that sign say, Pop?" asked Eddie. "It says Antiques," said his father. "Are we going to see Aunt Teak?" asked Eddie. "Does she own the store?" "Not Aunt Teak," said his father. "Antiques. Antiques means old. When you see that sign, it means that the shop sells old things." "You mean junk?" said Eddie. "Sounds exciting." "No, indeed," said his father. "These things are valuable." By this time, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and Eddie had gotten out of the car. They walked up the path to the porch. "I never saw a store with a porch before," said Eddie. "Well, you're in the country now," said his mother. "They often have porches." Eddie looked around the porch. It was full of all kinds of objects. Among them were some huge kettles, some fire screens, and brass and iron andirons. There were long iron forks and tongs for handling the logs in a fireplace. There was an old wooden bench and a big wooden box with pictures painted on it. "Wow," said Eddie, "it sure looks like junk." The windows of the shop were filled with shelves, and the shelves were covered with glass vases, cups, plates, salt cellars, pitchers, and sugar bowls. The inside of the store was crammed with furniture, tables, chairs, chests of drawers, and cabinets full of china. The store was big. It seemed to Eddie to go back and back and back. "Jeepers," thought Eddie, "I'll bet a fellow could find some very valuable property around here." While his father and mother were busy talking to the owner of the shop, Eddie wandered toward the back of the place. He looked over the shelves. He peered into open boxes and barrels. Finally, he went through a doorway into what seemed to be a storeroom. There he came upon a man opening a barrel. "Hello, son," said the man. "Can I do something for you?" "I'm just looking around," said Eddie. "My father and mother are out there." Eddie pointed to the front of the store. In a moment, Eddie's eyes fell upon something that interested him very much indeed. On a shelf stood an old carriage lamp. It was rusty and covered with dust. "Do you want to sell that lamp?" Eddie asked the man who was opening the barrel. The man looked up. "I guess we do," he replied. "How much is it?" asked Eddie. "Oh, about a quarter," said the man. Here's a picture. This right here is the carriage lamp. So I think it would be like a lamp that they would have put on, like when they had horse and carriage, they would put a lamp so if they were riding their horse and carriage at night, they could light the lamp so that they could see. Eddie reached into his pocket and pulled out all of his money. He had 75 cents. 25 cents was his weekly allowance. His father had given it to him that morning. The other 50 cents he had earned during the week delivering orders for Mr. Henderson. His regular boy was away. "Okay," said Eddie, "I'll take it." The man took the lamp from the shelf and blew the dust off of it. "Want it wrapped up?" he asked. Just then, Eddie's eye fell upon another interesting object. It had been hidden behind the carriage lamp. "What is that?" asked Eddie, pointing to what looked like a small iron urn with a wheel on each side. It, too, was rusty. "Oh, that?" asked the man, lifting it down. "That's an old-fashioned coffee grinder." "Those wheels are super," said Eddie, his eyes very big. "How much is that?" "Oh, I guess I can let you have that for 50 cents, said the man. Eddie looked at the coffee grinder for a few moments. Then he said, "I'll take that too." "Want them wrapped?" asked the man. "Yes, please," replied Eddie, taking a look out to the front of the store. His mother and father were busy looking at some dishes. "Suppose I put them in this carton," said the man. "That will be fine," said Eddie. Eddie watched the man put the coffee grinder into the bottom of the carton. Then he put the lamp on top. When he folded over the flaps, they didn't close because the end of the lamp was too long. The man tied a piece of cord over the top to hold the flaps down, but the end of the lamp still showed. "I guess that will do," he said. "Oh, sure," replied Eddie, as he handed over his 75 cents. "That will do." Eddie decided to go out of the back door with his package. Once outside, he ran to the car. He thought it would be best to put the package in the trunk of the car. His father had left the keys in the car, so Eddie unlocked the trunk and placed the package on the shelf. Then he locked the trunk and put the keys in his pocket. Eddie sauntered back to the front porch. He was examining a broken lock when his mother and father came out. "Look, Papa," said Eddie, "this is a swell lock." "It's a piece of junk," said Mr. Wilson. "No more junk is going into our house, Eddie. Put it down." Eddie put the lock down and walked to the car with his father and mother. "You left the keys in the car, Pop," said Eddie, handing over the bunch of keys. "Oh, thanks, Eddie," said his father. They all climbed into the car. Eddie sat between his father and mother. "Didn't they have any table, Mother?" asked Eddie. "No, dear," replied Mrs. Wilson, "but they expect one in next week." For some time they drove in silence. Then suddenly Eddie said, "Well, I had a very enjoyable time." Mr. and Mrs. Wilson immediately looked down at Eddie. He looked up at them with a sweet smile on his face. Then they looked at each other. Mr. Wilson put on the brakes and stopped the car. He turned around and looked on the back seat of the car and on the floor. There was nothing there. "What did you say, Eddie?" his father asked. Eddie looked up and said, "I just said I've had a very enjoyable time." Mr. Wilson took the keys from the car, opened the door, and stepped out. He walked around to the back of the car, opened the trunk, and there was Eddie's package. Eddie, standing beside his father, said, "Please, Papa, it isn't junk, it's swell stuff." "Eddie," said his father, "when I said no more junk, I meant it. This isn't going another foot of the way home." To Eddie's amazement, his father placed the package in a ditch beside the road. As Mr. Wilson leaned over, he saw the end of the carriage lamp sticking out of the top of the carton. He pulled off the cord and lifted the lamp out of the carton. "Say," he cried, "why, this is a carriage lamp. Say, this is mine. Why, I have been wanting one of these for a long time. I want it to go on the post at the front gate. Why, this is a beautiful carriage lamp. It just needs to be refinished. Well now, this is mine." "But bought it, Papa, said Eddie. I paid for it. Well, I'll give you $1 for it, Eddie, said his father. How is that? Okay, said Eddie. He had only paid 25 cents for it. There's a picture of them looking at the box beside the road. In the midst of this discovery, Mrs. Wilson joined Eddie and his father. Look, Mother, Mr. Wilson cried. Look at this fine carriage lamp. This is mine. Mrs. Wilson was busy looking into the carton, which still lay in the ditch. Why, look at this old coffee grinder, she cried. Oh, what a ducky coffee grinder. Oh, this is mine. These old coffee grinders make the most beautiful lamps you ever saw. Mrs. Porter has one, and it's lovely. With a coat of red paint, this will be perfect. Mrs. Wilson held the old coffee grinder very lovingly. Oh, this is mine, she said. But I bought it, Mama, said Eddie. I paid for it. Oh, well, I'll give you $1 for it, said his mother. Is $1 all right? Ah, Mama, said Eddie, I like that coffee grinder. I like it a lot. Well, I'll give you $2 for it, said his mother. That's a lot of money, Eddie. Think how rich you will be. Okay, said Eddie. The three went back to the car. Mr. Wilson went first, carrying his carriage lamp. Then Mrs. Wilson, carrying her coffee grinder. Little Eddie brought up the rear with $3 in his small fist. When they were almost home, Mr. Wilson said, By the way, Eddie, how much did you pay for that lamp? $0.25, said Eddie. And how much did you pay for the coffee grinder? Asked his father. 50 cents, Eddie replied. Not bad, said his father, looking at his mother. So he got more from his mom and dad than he had paid, so he actually made money on it. You know, Papa, said Eddie, I've been thinking, do you know what I'm going to be when I grow up? No, replied Mr. Wilson. What are you going to be? I'm going to be a junk man, said Eddie. That's a good way to get rich. How about letting me go into business with you? Asked his father. Okay, Papa, said Eddie. Will we have a store? Oh, certainly, said his father, and we'll have a big sign that says, Wilson and Son, all kinds of junk. And that is the end of the story of Little Eddie. This book was written by Carolyn Haywood. So if you like this book, she's written other books. There's more books about Little Eddie, and there's also books about Betsy. Anyway, so if you enjoyed it, maybe you can get your mom to borrow some of her other books. All right, I hope you have enjoyed Storytime with Miss Stephanie.